So a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Maury and Steve for setting the day up. We really enjoy a great collaboration with Maury and ARM, and I think he does great work. So really appreciate the opportunity to be engaged with you all along. I didn't realize this was my idea. I apologize. But I do think it's very useful, and so I think we'll see as the day goes on that we attract a lot of interest in here. So look, I want to maybe kick off, Martin, with you by just to tell us. I found out in the little pre-chat we had, you've been in the industry for a long time, but you're kind of new to cell and gene therapy. And of course, welcome to ARM, because you're a newcomer to ARM as well, and we're delighted you're a member. What do you see, just as a way to tee up the discussion today, what do you see as you look in, relatively new to the space? What do you think when you look at what's going on?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kieran. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this event. When I got the brief of Fireside Chat, I imagined a glass of scotch and a roaring fire, but anyway, early start. But no, basically what we are, I feel like the new boy on the block, really, with cell and gene therapy. I mean, I've been in the industry about 30 years. About over a decade of that I've spent in vaccines, and I do see some similarities, actually, between the two sectors. Particularly in terms of the integration of the supply chain with the customer. And I was joking with you earlier on. I always used to joke with my manufacturing colleagues in vaccines that making a vaccine is more like cookery than chemistry. And I see big similarities here as well, because you're dealing with living cells, living processes, and you can't do this in a garage. It really is sophisticated stuff. I see a whole raft of excitement, to be quite honest. And if you look at it feels to me like this is page 1 of chapter 1 of an entirely new book on medicine. And therefore, I think that's what excites me. It's what excites our company. And it's something that, we really want to be part of.
But it's different for GSK. I mean, this is kind of different territory for you. Yeah. From a strategy standpoint, I mean, compared to the blockbuster drugs you see, how strategically, how do you view something like this?
It's a great question, and people often ask me that question, being in rare diseases. Think, well, what on earth is GSK doing in rare diseases? And I'll try and summarize the position for us, really. I think, first of all, we see our mission as GSK is really simply to help people do more, feel better, and live longer. So I think we feel if we've got an opportunity to treat or cure a rare disease, we're at the raw unmet need end of the spectrum, and therefore, we feel it's an obligation to try and do something about that, first of all. The second thing, I think this is really important, is that rare diseases give us a window into human biology. And scientifically, with a very long innovation cycle that we have, then, and innovation really is our lifeblood in a company like GSK, then if we can identify a target that's validated in a human and a rare disease setting, there may well be collateral benefit of breakthroughs with that target for more common diseases. So let me give you an example. If I look at fibrosis, if we discover a pathway and a target against tissue fibrosis that's successful, you can try that in a very high unmet need area like PAH or CTD. And if you're successful, you may find that has application in other more prevalent fibrotic illnesses. So scientifically, very interesting. The other aspect is it gives us an opportunity to apply cutting-edge technologies. So in our portfolio in rare diseases, through a couple of partnerships, one with ISIS Pharma in the US, we've got a partnership on antisense oligonucleotides for amyloidosis. We've got a long-standing partnership going back 5 years with the Telethon Institute for Gene Therapy, which allows us to help try and apply cell and gene therapy to ultra-orphan diseases initially, and then move to more prevalent diseases. So we see this as being a very exciting area, but one that gives us not just an immediate return, but we think there's a potential for a longer-term innovation as well.
So there's more scale. It's not that you think it'll go from being something that's fragmented to something with scale over time?
Ultimately, yes. I think that, I mean, we're looking at this as a long-term strategic move. In fact, if you think very long-term, I mean, and like I say, we're on page 1 of chapter 1 at the moment, but if you can really re-engineer a cell to do something that it either can't do or could do better, then the potential is phenomenal. And what we're looking to create, in fact, there's quite a big investment in the company now to create a platform to enable us to do this. And you can see cell and gene therapy as another modality to sit next to, you know, vaccination, small molecules, biopharmaceuticals, ultimately as another modality to deliver treatments for, you know, many different types of diseases. But it's really the baby steps now, in a way, of, you know, starting with the ultra-orphan diseases where the unmet need's high, where you can show, you know, demonstrable clinical benefit, and then progressively over time move to more common indications.
And so, you know, you're relatively new into the field. Two questions, I guess, that are kind of linked. What are the hurdles for you as you enter here? Well, you know, what are going to be the things that push you along? And secondly, I think, you know, for the benefit of the people in the room as well, what are you looking for when you go outside the gate?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that the big challenge I see in the area is that is to take what is largely an experimental procedure and try and globalize it. And to do that, clearly, you need to try and crack the problem, the code of being able to get a reproducible and predictable outcome from something that's done in a widespread setting. And so really, I think that's the big challenge. But then there's many others, I think. The first one is, you know, how long do you follow up patients? I mean, we're in an area where we've got integrative gene therapy, so you're changing somebody's genome forever. And therefore, you know, how do you look at that from a pharmacovigilance and long-term monitoring?
And commercial.
And commercial, right. And on the commercial side, actually, Kieran, it's good that you mentioned that, because I think there's also the potential for very long-term impact, very durable, perhaps even lifelong impact on disease from a one-off treatment. And that's something that payment mechanisms are just not used to dealing with. You know, so there's lots and lots of challenges. And the way I'd summarize it in a way is that certainly with integrative gene therapy, there's no plug-and-play model here commercially, and we're going to have to try and develop this together as we progress. But I'd be keen to get your view as well in terms of, and you know, how we can look for help as well. I mean, it looks like things like setting product specs is way different from the areas that are in our comfort zone, and I appreciate your view on this as well.
It's very, very interesting. So I think where we come from, so if you look at our position, I guess, in the biologics industry, one of the reasons we're very keen to get engaged in this space is, like you, we see the potential. We do think it's long term. But what we see when we look out right now is a lot of fragmentation, a lack of standardization for all sorts of good reasons, because you're tackling individual issues at cellular level across so many fronts. Plus, I mean, we often think and look at charts like Murray's and refer back to the monoclonal antibody space and say, well, if you track the development of monoclonal antibodies, looks like it could go a similar track, and you know, we're living 2003 all over again. I think the difference here is that it's going to take the convergence of more stuff to make this therapy actually work in a patient treatment, especially whilst we're in an autologous setting. And you know, to use another well-trotted out phrase, you know, the process is the product. And so, and since we kind of are process-oriented people, we're trying to look at this in a way, how can we do enough to control and monitor and gather data on the process so that we can, over time, make it easier for the regulators to say, you know, going this approach looks very like using that approach, and therefore we start to feel a bit more comfortable. And over time, if you can gather enough data, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm coming at this from an industrialist sort of point of view. There may be, I think if we gather enough data in the right way and can analyze it in the right way, we may be able to get the regulators to shift their attitude towards some of the things they need to look at to improve these products. So then there are some investors in the room, you know, as you go to the GE board, or sorry, GSK board, slip of the tongue there. I have to go to the GE board. I wouldn't swap.
Happy to help.
When you go to the board and talk about this, I mean, how do you think about the investor angle on this?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, as I mentioned before, we're in this sort of long term, and we recognize that it is going to be a cumulative building of capability over time that's going to reach the success point eventually. But right now, I think the transformative therapies have the potential to offset significant cost in the healthcare system.
Right.
And everybody's bankrupt, right, these days. So I think I've yet to meet a payer who isn't interested in saving money. So I think if we can find a way, and actually I do find there's a high degree of openness, and you can see lots of academic papers written on this, starting to be written on this as well, to really embrace novel ways of funding and reimbursing durable therapies. And so I do think here that there is true value, intrinsic value in the transformative elements of cell and gene therapy, and that's something that, you know, we see the potential there. But, you know, it's going to take time for the sector to mature.
So let me ask a slightly controversial question. Do the valuations of the companies out there worry you?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's not something that I follow a lot. I mean, I think that, you know, I'm pretty much head down on what I'm doing with GSK and trying to satisfy our board. I mean, you know, at the end of the day...
I follow it just to see who has money.
Well, it's interesting to see who has money today and who doesn't tomorrow, you know, but... I mean, I think there's obviously been a frothy period, and I think that seemed to be what I've read in the media. I think for us, though, the way we look at the investment returns, it has to stand on its own 2 feet in relation to the other opportunity costs we have within a business like GSK. So, you know, we I'm sure, like GE, have a target rate of return that we're aiming for, and anything that we do, we need to make sure that we're above the threshold, or confident that we could be above the threshold. But, you know, let's face it, it's still a risky business for anyone, and it's very much the nature of innovation, I think, in this area.
So I'm going to open up for questions from other people in a few minutes, but just what excites you? I mean, as you one of the great things about your job must be you get to see a lot of stuff, probably too much.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I think I've got the best job in the company. I mean, it's great because, you know, I haven't got anybody trying to play product manager. Most people can't spell the diseases we work in, so it's you get a degree of autonomy, which is helpful. But honestly, what excites me here is that you're at the cutting edge of where science meets patients. And I think it does it more so in this area than pretty much any area I've ever worked in. And that's partly because of the intimacy that the process, being the product, has with the medical procedure and the patients, and the profound impacts you can get there. So for me, I find that very exciting. The technologies, I mean, just thinking about site-specific gene editing and some of the stories we've seen over the weekend, I mean, this is incredible space-age technology. Now, it's not going to be in clinical routine application tomorrow, but you can't help but get excited. But you know, the one thing that excites me more than anything else is actually feeling like we're on the threshold of getting medicines to patients through the regulatory process. And now, the technology we've got today with, you know, autologous ex vivo gene therapy using stem cells, you know, you may think, well, that seems a bit old hat compared to, you know, TALEN or CRISPR, but actually, it is what is now becoming on the threshold of being clinically applicable on a wider scale. And that, for me, really excites me, because you can take this from a nice idea to having an impact on patients.
And so that sort of brings me on to another topic then. And I didn't give you a warning that I might ask you this. What about the hype? Are you worried about hype? And are you worried that you come under pressure to release therapies out into the market too quickly?
I think the advantage of going through a strict regulatory process is that you have to be incredibly diligent. And when I look at what we're trying to do in GSK, I think that we're almost trying to create a pharma tech in a way. And the way, and it's one of the things that excites me about this role, is that there are some capabilities of a big pharma which I think are fantastic in this area. So industrialization, having a global reach, being able to develop and register products, having access to a very broad range of scientific platforms. I think if we can combine those with the things that have really been the domain of the single category biotech companies, which really dominate this area, and in rare diseases more generally, that intimacy with the patient community, with the rare disease community in this case, and also that sense of urgency and focus. If we can combine those two things, I think we can create something really special. But what you can't ever shortchange is the rigor of the regulatory process. And I think for me this is a helpful thing, because it means that, much as you'd love to get something in a patient quickly, you cannot avoid the fact that certainly with our technology today, you are changing somebody's genome forever. And that's a very serious undertaking, and therefore, we need to accept that responsibility and live up to it. So I think it's in a way, this is why I feel starting with ultra-orphan conditions is a good place to start, because you can kind of learn and actually learn with the regulators and others who are on the same journey to some extent on how to do this, how to bring a product to the market, and how to get that reproducible and predictable outcome that you're looking for.
So maybe then one final question for you. There are many small companies in the room here who are developing technologies for rare diseases. They're at many of them at the early stages, although as you see they're making great progress through clinical trials as well. What advice, because their dream probably from time to time might be to be bought by GSK, do a big collaboration with you. What advice would you give to the people in the room who are at the early stages here?
Well, I would say come and talk to us. I certainly strongly believe that there's absolutely no monopoly on innovation here. I think largely the role of a company like GSK is to integrate technological breakthroughs, and I think we're very fortunate with our partnership with the Telethon Institute for Gene Therapy, with Telethon and the San Rafael Hospital, where most, if not all, of the discovery is really happening in clinical academia. And I think we need each other, because at the end of the day, to take something from the bedside to a global scale through a rigorous regulatory process is really difficult, if not impossible, to do from an academic setting. And actually discovering medicines in the way, with the courage that's needed to develop and discover these things, can really only happen often in clinical academia. And I think where the early biotech involvement is concerned, then sometimes there's going to be a convergence of interest there. And if there is, I'm really keen that we try and explore it.
Yeah, because it's a tricky balance. And I would even say from our own standpoint, we have that constant dilemma. For me, it's in the tool side of the business. We want to collaborate and discuss with people when they have something early on, because if they bring it to us when it's too far baked, there are bits that we just have where we have to start again for all sorts of reasons, design and sort of regulatory thinking primarily. But at the same time, and I think you and I would be accused of this, by people in the room, we're inclined to reject things when they're too early and then sort of want to reinvent them if they're too late. Yeah. And it's it's the tricky balance we have. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what resonates with me a lot is this not leaving it too late. I think that the sweet spot, if you can get it, is to start off on a pathway that is going to be CMC and regulatory and GCP ready as early as possible. So you're not having to redo things, and sometimes you have to because that's where you start from, but it's much, much, much easier if that can happen. And so I think early is key, but you're absolutely right. The earlier it is, the less proven it is, and therefore, you know, it's a tricky balance. And one thing I would say as well is that the sheer diversity of cell and gene therapy landscape is tricky, because if you commit yourself to a particular platform that you're not in, it's a whole different investment scenario. So for us, you know, our existing therapies are really in CD34 stem cells, you know, autologous ex vivo, largely lentivirus vector-based. And of course, with our partnership with Adaptimmune in TCR for oncology, you know, that's lentivirus-based as well. So if you're going to walk outside of that into a different type of vector or a completely different technology, I think we have to be aware that, you know, that may require quite a significant outlay, and therefore you've got to be pretty confident that that's a direction you want to go in.
One final question. This is the last one, I promise. How do you view the infrastructure that's out there to bring the different pieces together?
Well, I concur with your word that you used about fragmentation. You know, it feels rather fragmented, and to be honest, this is not that different from, I would say, the earlier days of vaccines.
Right.
You know? So I mean, I wasn't around in the 50s, but you know, you think back to that time, and when Jonas Salk invented the first polio vaccine that was, you know, in pretty much a widespread use. Could people really dream then that one day you'd be able to vaccinate against cervical cancer, or you'd be able to protect a child against 6 diseases with one shot, you know, or you'd be able to prevent against shingles and PHN if you're over 50, you know. All of these things are now becoming possibilities, have only occurred because of that progressive integration of technologies. And to some extent, it feels a bit like that in cell and gene therapy today, where there's a good deal of integration to do, and it does feel, and I guess it's just natural based in where this is in, you know, page 1 of chapter 1, if you like, that these things are rather fragmented, but I'm pretty convinced over time they will have to, and they will come together.
Great. We probably have time for a question from the audience. Has anybody got anything for Martin that they would like to... He's got lots of money, you know, he wants to invest. So look, there's nothing burning here. I mean, people are bound to catch you in the break. You know, if I thought I could have guests like you every day for my fireside chat, I would do this every day, you know. So you've been fantastic.
Thank you.
You've been fantastic to chat through. I think it's really interesting. We're just delighted that GSK is so committed to the space. And, you know, once again, I'd like to thank everybody for giving us the chance to chat through what's on our mind here. I hope it's useful to sort of, as the curtain raiser for the day. And I'd like now to introduce Keith Thompson from the Cell Therapy Catapult.
Thank you very much.